Welcome to the Deep Dive, where I uploaded my transcript for the podcast and have two AI hosts talk about it. They may go into more depth than I went into. So without further ado, here's the Deep Dive.
All right, buckle up everyone, because today we're diving deep into a topic that's all about those connections we crave, the ones that make us feel secure even when we're apart.
We're talking about object constancy.
It might sound a bit technical at first,
But trust me, it's a total game changer.
when it comes to understanding,
Our relationships and even our own behavior.
we're taking an excerpt from Difficulty with Object Constancy, The Why of Things, as our guide today.
By the end of this,
You'll have a whole new lens for looking at.
the dynamics of connection in your life.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is object constancy?
Well, think of it like this.
Okay.
Object constancy is this invisible thread that connects us to the people we love.
Okay.
It's that ability to hold on to that sense of connection,
That makes sense.
even when there's physical distance between us.
Right.
Or even when we're, disagreeing or having arguments.
So it's like even when things get a little rocky, you still have that underlying trust that the relationship is solid.
Exactly. It's that deep down knowing that your best friend is still your best friend, even if you haven't talked in a while.
Yeah.
Or that your partner still cares about you, even after a heated debate.
I get that.
That's object constancy in action.
That makes total sense. But let's flip the script for a second. What happens when that thread of connection, that object constancy, starts to fray or even snap? What's life like without it?
Imagine a world where every time someone leaves the room, it feels like they might disappear forever.
Oh.
That's kind of the reality for individuals who struggle with object constancy.
I see.
Even the smallest separations can trigger these really intense feelings of abandonment and anxiety.
So it's not just missing someone, it's a deeper fear of being completely alone.
Precisely. It's like their emotional world is constantly on edge.
I can only imagine how distressing that would be.
And this can lead to some pretty turbulent emotional swings,
Right, like a roller coaster.
One minute they might be showering you with love and affection, and the next they're overwhelmed with anger or suspicion.
So they might be convinced that you're going to abandon them.
Exactly.
This is already painting a pretty intense picture of how challenging this can be, not just for the individual, but for everyone around them.
It absolutely impacts relationships.
It makes it hard to build that trust.
It can make it incredibly challenging to build and maintain those stable, trusting connections that we all crave.
And I'm guessing it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
You're right, it's not. What's fascinating is that this lack of object constancy can actually show up in different ways depending on an individual's personality and even specific personality disorders.
Okay, so tell me more about that. How does object constancy, or the lack of it, play out differently in different people?
Let's take impulsive disregard disorder, or ID, for example.
Okay, and just as a reminder for our listeners, ID is sometimes also known as antisocial personality disorder.
Exactly. Now, people with ID often have a hard time forming those deep emotional bonds in the first place.
So their experience of object constancy, or the lack of it, might be different from someone who's, say, very emotionally expressive.
You got it. For someone with ID, it's not necessarily that they're feeling this intense fear of abandonment.
Interesting.
It's more that they might seem indifferent to others,
Okay.
or even forgetful of them when they're not physically present or directly serving their needs.
So their emotional wavelength when it comes to relationships is just different.
That's a great way to put it. And this can explain why their relationships can often feel quite transactional.
Wow, that's a really helpful insight. I'm starting to see how this idea of object constancy goes beyond just romantic relationships.
Absolutely.
It affects how we connect with our friends, family, even colleagues.
You're absolutely right. It really is a fundamental part of human interaction. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, let's consider folks with what's called extreme self-focus disorder, or ESFD, which you might also know as narcissistic personality disorder.
So we talked about how someone with ID might struggle to even form those deep bonds in the first place. What's the challenge for someone with ESFD?
With ESFD, their sense of self-worth is incredibly fragile.
Okay.
It's like they need that constant external validation and admiration to feel okay.
So when that admiration isn't there, when they feel ignored or underappreciated, that's when their object constancy takes a hit.
Exactly. And this can lead to some pretty intense reactions.
Like what?
They might lash out,
Okay.
withdraw,
Got it.
or even try to sabotage the relationship to protect their ego.
That's heavy stuff. It makes me think about those relationships where it feels like you're constantly walking on eggshells,
Absolutely.
trying not to upset the other person.
Now, let's shift gears to a personality style that I find both fascinating and challenging to understand. Those with emotional intensity disorder, or IED.
Also known as borderline personality disorder.
Right.
I have a feeling object constancy might be particularly tricky here.
You're spot on. Individuals with IED, they experience emotions very intensely, and they can swing between extremes really quickly.
So even a small disagreement or a short separation could really throw them off.
Absolutely. 1 minute they might be head over heels for you, and the next, if they sense even a slight shift in your mood or attention, they might feel utterly abandoned.
So it's this constant push and pull, this craving for closeness, but also this terror of being hurt or rejected.
Precisely. It can make relationships feel like a roller coaster. Now, before we dive into the impact of all of this on relationships, let's look at one more personality style.
Okay.
Those with traumatic attention-seeking disorder, or DISD, also known as histrionic personality disorder.
I'm sensing a theme here. I'm guessing object constancy challenges for folks with DISD also revolve around that need for attention.
You're catching on quickly. For individuals with DISD, feeling ignored or unimportant is almost unbearable.
Okay.
They might resort to really dramatic displays or attention-seeking behaviors just to make sure they stay in the spotlight.
It's like they need that constant validation to feel secure in the relationship.
Exactly.
But what's going on beneath the surface, do you think?
Deep down, it's often a fear of being forgotten or overlooked.
So they need those constant reminders that the relationship is solid.
They might have a hard time believing in its stability unless they're constantly being reassured and given attention.
This is giving me so much to think about already.
There's a lot to unpack.
So we've got ID, ESFD, IED, and DASD all experiencing these object constancy challenges in their own unique ways.
Right.
But what does this all mean for the people on the other side of these relationships? What's it actually like being in a relationship with someone who struggles with this?
That's a great question, and it's exactly what we'll explore next. Get ready for some serious aha moments as we unpack the impact of object constancy on the dynamics of relationships.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Understanding how object constancy, or the lack of it, can show up in all these different ways depending on, personality.
Right.
And even personality disorders.
Absolutely.
But I think it's time now to really focus on how this plays out in relationships.
Yeah.
Because these dynamics can be so confusing.
They really can.
And even hurtful for everyone involved.
Yeah, it's like...
And, if there's anyone listening who's thinking, oh my gosh, this is my relationship.
Right.
I want to assure them that this isn't about placing blame.
Exactly.
It's about understanding.
Understanding is key.
Yeah.
It's the first step towards having compassion, both for yourself and for your partner.
Because those intense reactions, the sudden shifts from love to anger or suspicion,
Yeah.
they're not coming from a place of wanting to hurt you.
Right.
It's coming from a place of fear.
It's often driven by this deep-seated fear and insecurity.
So it's more about recognizing that those reactions are a symptom of a deeper struggle.
Exactly.
That's got to be tough, though, to navigate that kind of emotional roller coaster.
It can be, but one of the most important things you can do is set clear boundaries.
Boundaries, okay?
It's about protecting your own emotional well-being
Okay.
so you don't get swept up in all that chaos.
So what would that look like practically? Can you give me an example?
Absolutely. Let's say you're in a heated argument and you can feel things escalating.
Yeah.
It might be a good idea to take a break, step away for a bit,
Okay.
let everyone cool down
That makes sense.
before trying to have a productive conversation.
Like hitting the pause button
Exactly.
before things get out of control.
And it's not about avoiding conflict. It's about choosing the right time and place
I get it.
to address sensitive topics.
That makes sense.
Another really important thing to remember is to recognize your own emotional needs.
Okay.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of trying to constantly reassure your partner or fix their emotional state.
Yeah,
But that's exhausting
it is.
and unsustainable.
But it's like you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly.
You have to take care of yourself first.
Precisely. And sometimes that means reaching out for support,
Reaching out. Oh, God.
talking to friends,
Yeah.
family, or even a therapist.
Right.
Having that external support can be a lifeline.
Yeah, and just to echo that, therapy is not a sign of weakness.
Absolutely not.
It's a sign of strength.
Shows commitment.
Yeah, that you're committed to understanding yourself and building healthier relationships.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive into object constancy in relationships,
Okay.
I think it's important to touch on the idea of healthy object constancy.
Okay. Yeah.
Because we've talked a lot about what happens when it's lacking.
Right.
But I think it's equally important to understand what it looks like when it's thriving.
So let's paint that picture. What does a relationship with healthy object constancy actually look and feel like?
Imagine a relationship where you feel secure
Okay.
and loved even when you're apart.
Yeah.
You trust that your partner's feelings for you are stable,
Okay.
consistent, even when they're busy or a little preoccupied.
Right. Or just having a bad day.
Exactly.
So it's like this deep down knowing that you're cherished, valued, even when life gets in the way.
Precisely. And this allows you to navigate disagreements
Right.
and challenges.
Without that fear of abandonment.
You know, that even when you argue, that foundation of the relationship is still solid.
That sounds incredible. I'm curious, though, how does someone develop that kind of security? Is it something we're born with, or is it learned?
That's a great question. Researchers have been exploring this for decades.
Yeah.
And while there's certainly a biological component to attachment,
Right.
our early childhood experiences play a huge role.
So those early interactions with our caregivers,
Absolutely.
that really sets the stage for our future relationships.
If you were lucky enough to have caregivers who were consistently responsive to your needs,
Yeah.
you know, who provided that warmth and comfort when you were distressed,
Yeah.
you're much more likely to develop a secure attachment style later in life.
So it's like those early experiences create this internal blueprint
Exactly.
for healthy relationships.
But what if someone didn't have those ideal early experiences? Are they destined to struggle forever?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Not at all.
Okay, good.
While those early experiences are influential,
Yeah.
we're not just products of our past.
Yeah, bro.
With awareness, intention, and support, it's possible to heal
You can heal from that.
those insecure attachment patterns
Okay.
and cultivate greater security.
That's such a hopeful message.
It is.
Because I think some people listening might think, well, I didn't get that blueprint, so I'm stuck.
Right. But there's always hope for change and growth.
That's great.
It might take some work, you know,
Right.
some self-reflection,
Okay.
maybe some guidance from a therapist.
Yeah.
But it's possible to rewire those old patterns.
And learn new ways of relating.
Exactly.
This is so empowering because it really highlights that we have a choice in how we show up in our relationships.
Absolutely. And remember, building healthy object constancy isn't just about romantic relationships.
Right.
It impacts all areas of our lives.
It does.
Friendships, family, even our relationship with ourselves.
Wow. So it really is about our fundamental capacity for connection.
Exactly.
I love that.
And with that understanding, we can make conscious choices that nurture those connections and create a more fulfilling life.
I think that's such a beautiful way to put it.
Thank you.
This has been incredibly insightful, really.
It has.
We've gone from defining object constancy
Yeah.
to exploring how its absence can create this really turbulent emotional landscape in relationships.
Right.
And we've touched on how this dynamic can show up so differently across various personality disorders,
Yeah.
offering a glimpse into those unique challenges.
Yes.
But importantly, we've also talked about what it means to have healthy object constancy.
Yeah.
That beautiful sense of security that allows us to really weather the storms of life without that constant fear of disconnection.
It's been a true deep dive.
It has.
So for our listeners, what's the one thing you want them to walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Recognizing the role of object constancy can be truly transformative in understanding your relationships.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for human behavior.
Exactly.
Suddenly, things that seemed confusing or hurtful start to make sense.
And with that understanding comes the power to make more informed choices about your relationships.
Yes.
About setting boundaries and ultimately protecting your own emotional well-being. I think that's such an important message, you know?
It is.
Understanding this concept can really change the way we see our relationships.
It can. And remember, this is just the beginning of the exploration.
Right. This deep dive, it's just the starting point.
It is.
We've given you the tools, but now it's up to you to use them.
Yeah.
Pay attention to how you react in relationships.
Right, yeah.
You know, like think about those moments where you feel a little insecure.
Uh-huh.
Or maybe you get angry because someone didn't react the way you expected.
Do you see any of this happening in your own life
Yeah, maybe you notice these patterns in your own behavior.
or in the people you're close to?
It's like we've been given this new lens and we can see the world and our relationships in a whole new light.
And as you start to notice these patterns, approach them with curiosity.
Curiosity, okay.
Not judgment.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, what's really happening here?
Yeah.
What needs aren't being met?
Because I think that's when things really start to shift.
That's when the real change happens.
When we move away from blame and judgment and start to see each other with compassion.
And understand it.
Because we're all on this journey of learning and growing, and sometimes we mess up.
We do. We stumble.
But with awareness and effort, we can build really fulfilling, secure relationships.
We can.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought.
Okay.
How can this new understanding about object constancy change how you approach your relationships?
Yeah, how can you use this to communicate better?
To set healthier boundaries.
And build stronger connections with the people you care about.
That's something to think about as you continue on your journey.
Exactly.
And remember, the journey doesn't end here.
Keep exploring, keep learning.
And keep diving deep into the incredible world of human connection.
We'll see you next time.
Keep those aha moments coming.